So far, what's the problem in today's society is the fact that people are bound to their own differences, to their own identities, that they require themselves to push out others and others to not come in and to stay where they are. As human beings, we are, in a way, vessels, and we are limited in the circumstances of which we limit ourselves by, because we are bound by a set of biological principles: race, language, culture. And what happens is that today, in the society that we live in, we are bound by the statutes of morality, in which morality itself is subjective. Some may argue that it's objective. Then that comes to a perspective on religion, or perspectives, I would say, because I've seen many religions that have differing views. For example, people complain about Islam allowing pedophilia to exist and whatnot, but that's not the case. People don't actually know what it is. Or rather, that Japan seems to have a culture of politeness, or Shintoism, or China Confucianism, or authoritarianism, or and the US some kind of free country, basically of democracy and all that. And Latin America, you've got things. So it's a stereotype. The truth is this: the people that live, the natives, and the people who colonialized those lands, they use the arguments of morality to excuse their own justification for colonializing others. You could say that the Native Americans colonialized others in their land. You could also say that they were never peaceful in the first place. But no human on this planet is peaceful. No human. You had to somehow live by a code where it's either that, I remember this person on the internet, far out, he was just smart. There were 3 rules. If it wasn't yours, you have to fight to defend it. If you didn't defend it, you might or probably would lose it. If you lost it, then that's on you, or you'd have to take back some way. And I think that's the fact in life, that people, when they've lost, they've got to gain back what was once theirs. And most colonialized peoples never got to have the chance to do that. When we look at the world today now, it is in the people who succeeded in colonializing others. I'm no better. I'm no different. If I was a Chinese, who knows what my tribe would be? My tribe would be on the winning tribe for hundreds of thousands of years, possibly, from my other ancestors to my great-grandfather. We probably did some bad on our own, and I'm not to say that I'm, going to be, everyone who's born today is born out of those who come to victory at certain costs. Those who were killed, those who were colonialized, enslaved. Enslavement, well, it depends, because like the black African Americans, they still retain their culture, even if today they were beneath that kind of yoke that they managed to push themselves against. And the truth is, really, it is a wonder. It is a wonder that really you kind of had to focus to push yourself as a person who survived. You survived millions of years of threats. You've evolved over that, of which of course others are better in their own way. There are men taller than you. There are men more handsome than you. There are men who get women far better than you. But ultimately speaking, what matters is really the way that a person is, by not his or her character, but by what he is given, what she is given, and the character that comes with it is taught alongside. About, if you, let's just say for example, right, if you are born Chinese, you can learn, there are people who can learn language easily because of this FOXP2 gene, and amongst other things, So, in many ways, the truth is that we, as humans, the only way that we're able to come in unison is not to come in unison, but to acknowledge and accept the differences. I'm not Japanese. I can never be, but I'm pure-blooded Chinese. And it's already tough because even the Chinese don't accept me as their own. Much less you have to involve certain variables like wealth, status, looks. I'm sorry, I'm not going to argue about that one. That's not a given. That's an actual. I'm not going to sound like an incel or black, but it is legitimately a scientific issue. You are judged by how you are perceived to look, how you perceive to carry yourself, how you perceive to this and that, this and that, and this and that. And one of the keys things in this argument is that why then do we have racism? It's because of the fact that human beings are dictating to each other how moral their cultures are. Is it worse or is it better? But in some ways you can't really, it's difficult to judge morals by the bigger picture. For example, when we look at superpowers like the US versus China, but when we look at Taiwan, when we look at above and beyond, if there was such thing as alien, well, of course, maybe, there may be. Let's just take, for example, the reptilians or the Greys. They have a huge need to conquer other planets, other galaxies. Then there's also another need to let the native indigenous populations, like human beings, just allow themselves to be. But the reptilians don't want that. They want them to be changed in their image or whatnot. And so you got this battle that is even worse than what you think US and China is, in an even wider scope of the moral spectrum. Then you can't even look at it as a moral spectrum anymore, but rather, how do they survive? What do they thrive on? To them, they eat emotions. They literally eat, they harvest the emotions of. It sounds crazy, but it's like, think about it. It's a thought experiment. So with racists, they tend to nitty-gritty pick the details. Like, China is communists, China is authoritarian, the US is democracy, the US is freedom. But you don't understand whether you compare one or the other is irrelevant. You haven't been to that. You haven't been to Beijing, or you've been to Beijing, it doesn't matter. If you've been to US, they've got their own issues in their own sorts of ways. And political protests don't really do much in democracies. I live in New Zealand, and I've seen my fair share of protests. But no one cares. I mean, you have your right to protests, and people say that fundamentally is what democracy is all about. But the question is, in a democracy, the people have the power. But if the people have the power, that means power by itself can manipulate events to shape certain outcomes. But if by these events they don't even budge what the status quo is, how's that viable power? Power that actually changes things. It doesn't. So in regards to morality, what the Japanese, what the Chinese, what everybody does, the only thing is how good you look, how handsome you look, how wealthy you are, how much status, how much the materialistic, superficial things of life are unfortunately what people right now really think that it seems to matter, because they thought that, spirituality and all that kind of stuff is just complete bullshit. There's nothing else but how you live, in how you eat and stuff. I mean, yeah, sure, but at the moment when we're facing a catastrophe, imagine if the current event happened again today. None of that stuff would matter. The bankers wouldn't matter. The people that only are able to survive with their horse and cart and grill chickens and do a lot of things, that's what matters. I mean, it depends on the timing of the certain events, right? Of how we seem to think these things occur. As to how, we don't know. All we can do is what is necessary is rely on our own self-sufficiency. The government, politics, communism, democracy, it is much needed in a civilization to suffer first and then to enjoy the fruits later. For example, this is my opinion. China has went through a lot of wars. They went through warlords, from emperors to warlords to, you would say a dictator, yes. Mao tried to make communism work, but it all failed because some people gained too much power and didn't care about it. Not that, there's a long story to it, but communism inevitably, in certain parts of it that was established in China, did kind of work. It's just the problem that you've got this one ruler ruling over, and then you've got the state party ruling over. But at the same time, some people in the Soviet Union were fairly satisfied with their lives. But of course, you can say there's no choice, or there's security and safety. Which would you rather pick? You'd rather pick freedom and security. But here in the West, there is no freedom. There's maybe security, but even that is dwindling because of capitalism. The whole notion of paying rent to a private owner, and then, they get to own their home, that's capitalism in itself, but that's also bad, unless if you're able to, also play the system. And it's by using capitalism, democracy, socialism, and mixing parts like Venus Project that it works. But when we talk about racism, everybody uses all these concepts that are so completely, to be honest, it's just a matter about how willing are we to improve our own civilization and evolve past insults like that, which makes a society truly civilized. Now I think we're going back, not forwards. I think that what China has been through, what Germany has been through, what Poland has been through, even what Russia has been through, what all the countries that have suffered like this been through, is that Germany now has taken a loss, but they went through the night, they went through the abyss to go through this. Like when there's only bottom, when there's abyss, you encounter aliens, like the movie, and you find out that they, you finally figure out at the end, when you're at rock bottom, the only way is through the center of the earth, and then you go back out through another volcano. It sounds crazy but ridiculous, but this is what I'm saying. Like, the only way forwards is from the bottom, is not even on top, it's through. You'll find a way top. That's what Germany has, Germany, despite what's happening today, is finally pushed everything to succeed. You look at China today. All people blame China for whatever it is, but they look at the suffering they wrought upon themselves, the population. That's just sad. It's not something to be mocked or racistly insulted. I have like people who race insult me with, whatever it is, and it's just like, why are you complaining about something that is not even my problem? And the country is like, yeah, but it feels like ridiculous. You blame somebody for someone else's problems, and like it makes you feel good about it. You're a coward. You should blame about your own country instead of someone else's. You can complain about it, but who are you? Because you know you're not even somebody with power. You just complain. You want to establish democracy in China? You got to be a politician, mate. Go to China and buy some politicians out and see how you do. Or something like that. I don't know. And you got to convince them. Stop talking and walk. Do the walk instead of the talk. You know what I mean? So people like that, that's easy, man. I wish I was as naive and ignorant as them, but that's the truth of life. All you gotta do is just forget about it. They'll say whatever they want to say. They'll heap racist insults. They'll put anti-insults. They will justify the insults. But at the end of the day, who the hell that they are, even if they're someone, they're just complaining. They're just whining, wasting their time, making racist insults against China. They're just wasting their emotions. They're wasting their energy. They could be doing something productive themselves. All you do is just write a few comments that just shows your ignorance, shows your idiocy. And of course, whether or not the situation in China is true, you got to go there yourselves to see it. You got to figure out what's going on. You got to figure out what's right, what's this, what's that, how can you change it. And it's just too much effort for people, so they just take the easy way out. And then for other countries, it's just like we got to figure out our own problems and solve it. What the Soviet Union did, it's easy. But at the same time, it's best to keep things quiet. Because that's human nature. Who the West is to say about that? They did a lot of wrong to their own population, to Guam, to Hawaii. If they complain about Taiwan, why didn't those Hawaiians fight for their own sovereignty? They tried. They still failed. At least the British allowed the Maori to take over, and they gave a certain, now some people are complaining about it, but at least the British is far better in their moral, and the British, they're allying themselves with China as well, even if they don't like China. What's wrong? People can be racist, but what's wrong? You've developed such a relationship over the thousands of years, and just because one skin color is different, one this and then one that, and to be honest, the British should not blame China for what went through them. It's like an abused child. Who knows whether that child will grow to be an abuser themselves, and this is what we're seeing now. But there's no excuse, of course, so the child's got to change. China's got to change, but you can't force it to change. You just got to let him be. As I forget about it, man, it's just like the human brain is just lazy. And until it stop being lazy and we evolve a few more 100 years, decades, people who die out, like, who knows? People who want to not die, they've got to change and evolve. If not, then so be it. The only thing is, if you look at like Gattaca, if we look at our lives, we can't look at the future, we can't predict it, but we want to know, is my life worth living? Never give up. Reproduce, marry, whatever it is, but at the end of the day, you've got to prepare yourself. You got to prepare yourself for what comes after. Well, I don't know, man. I think, honestly speaking, the war over Taiwan is ridiculous. The US can just allow it to be, man. It's just, it's chips, it's resources. People can make that on their own. Democracy and all that, it's just all complete bullshit, man. Authoritarianism is bullshit as well. People just want to find a system that works for the best for them. And I know that it's about freedom, and you don't want to be like forced a gun to your head and stuff like that, but come on, man. both people, both, like, it's just ridiculous to me, man. Like, racism and all that bullshit. The one thing that matters most is how you look, how you can socially, aptly talk to other people, whether you have the gift of the gab or the language experience. Some people are so fluent in languages, they just got the brain to speak bilingual, like polyglots, you know? They're insane. You know, yeah. But at the end of the day, what matters is the core of your soul, whether you change it or not. That's all I can say.